25. Matthew 25. We've been looking at a series of parables. I think I've mentioned to you that Matthew organizes Jesus' teaching in 5 blocks to help us remember that Jesus is greater than Moses. That's a parallel to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And the last block of teaching is about his return, the second coming. And so in chapter 24, we have lots and lots of details about how Jesus' return will be sudden, how it will be certain, how it will be visible. We won't have to wonder or question, did he come or is he out there somewhere? We will see it. We will know it. And then he tells a series of parables. He begins at the end of chapter 24 by talking about a servant, a master who leaves servants in charge of his household, and the master is gone a long time, and the servants begin to beat their fellow servants and eat and drink with drunkards. It's a warning that we need to be ready because we don't know the day or hour that he will return. And then last Wednesday, we looked at a parable about 10 women who are trying to celebrate a wedding. And 5 of them are wise and 5 of them are foolish. 5 are prepared, 5 are not prepared. And so in this series, there are 2 more parables, and these are parables that we are very familiar with, but every time I study them, I learn new things. They are rich in depth and rich in meaning. And so tonight, look with me at the parable that's recorded for us in Matthew 25, starting about verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. Notice the his part. In fact, in the Greek, it's more emphatic than that. His own servants. So he calls together those who belong to him, and he entrusts to them wealth that also belongs to them. So, not giving anything away, who do you think the master is? God, and perhaps more specifically, Jesus. So we belong to him. We are his people. We are the sheep of his pasture. The things that he entrusts to us, who do they belong to? They belong to Jesus too. We were born with, nothing. We'll die with nothing. We're just stewards of these resources. And the question is, how are we using them? What will we do with the things we've been entrusted with? Will we use them for God's kingdom, or will we use them for our own comfort? What will we do with what's been entrusted to us? And so he calls his own servants together and he entrusts his wealth to them. How much wealth has been entrusted to us? Well, I'm not looking for a dollar figure, so no need to check your bank statement or that kind of thing at the moment. But yes, eternal life. And if we were to make a list of the things God has entrusted to us, whether it be eternal life or the breath we're breathing now, or the ability to speak or to sing or to think, or so many, many, many blessings. We would run out of time and space to list them all. God is a generous God who gives and gives and gives again. And that's illustrated in this story. Look at the next verse. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. And then he went on his journey. Well, I don't know if anybody's ever given you a bag of gold. That sounds, heavy and impressive, doesn't it? I was reading from the NIV. You might have a different translation that reads a little differently. I grew up hearing the word talent. 5 talents, 2 talents, 1 talent. And there's a footnote in my Bible that 1 talent was worth 20 years of a day laborer's wage. So 1 talent would equal 20 years. So 5 talents would equal how much? Y'all do that math real quick. 100 years of work. Well, that's more than a lifetime, right? So what's entrusted to these servants is a lot. 100 years of salary to one, and 40 years of salary to another, and 20 years of salary to the one. So don't be feeling sorry for that fellow with the one talent or the one bag of gold. He's got a lot, right? Now we'll get to feeling sorry for him a little later. Well, I guess I can spoil it, but anyway, the master entrusts his servants with these things and then leaves, goes on a journey. In the Greek, there's a word that kind of, it gets brought out in the next verse in my translation, but the word between verses 15 and 16 is the word immediately. Immediately. Immediately, the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once. That's where it gets kind of recorded in this translation. He went at once to put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So he's been entrusted with 100 years of salary, and now he has how much? 200 years of salary, right? So he's done quite well with his investments. And he does this at once, immediately. There's some enthusiasm behind this, and it shows in the results that are there. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now, there'll be some harsh words said about this fella, but let me defend him for just a minute before we get too carried away. There aren't banks in this day and time. One of the safest things you could do with your money, there's not a mattress to put it under. So one of the safest things you could do is to dig a hole and bury it. And so all through the centuries, that's what people have done with their money. And occasionally somebody digs something up and is surprised by, what they find that way, because particularly in times of war or times of distress, that would be what would happen. That was a way to preserve it, a way that maybe it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. And so this man is nervous. He is afraid. He doesn't want to lose what has been entrusted to him, and so he digs a hole and hides his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The master calls him good and faithful. He's done well. He's done what was asked of him. He has taken care of the master's money, the master's gifts. And notice, if you will, that the master says you've been faithful with a few things. Now, how much did I tell y'all 5 bags of gold was worth, or 5 talents? 100 years of work, right? The master calls those a few things. You've been faithful with a few things. I'm going to bless you with more things. Whew. Wow. Paul writes, eyes have not seen, nor ears heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man the things that God has prepared for those who love him. If we are faithful with a few things, meaning the breath that we're breathing and the things God has given to us to use for his glory, God has more in store. It's not the end of the story. And so this one who has been faithful with these things, he will now be put in charge of many things. And he has the wonderful reward of sharing in his master's happiness. As Christians, what do we want to hear our master say? We want our master to say, well done, good and faithful servant, right? So this man who had 5 has done well. But notice, if you will, that there's a man with 2 bags. And the man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. Now, what I want you to notice is that what the master says in verse 23 is exactly the same as what the master says in verse 21. Note that. And I failed to point out to you back at the very beginning of this, I left out I read it, but I didn't emphasize it. Back in verse 15, the master entrusts these things each according to their ability. So the one with 5 makes it into 10, the one with 2 makes it into 4, and he also is commended as a good and faithful servant. He's been faithful with a few things. He'll be entrusted with many things and can share in his master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. Well, has the master lost anything? Okay. All right, think about that question, though. Has the master lost anything? Okay. Okay. Yes, when inflation kicks in, the bag of gold's not worth nearly as much as it was when he gave it to him. Could be that. Yeah, we would like to look at it and say, well, no harm, no foul, no problem. He gave him a bag of gold, and here's the bag of gold back. Okay. But is it really that simple? If we've been entrusted with the master's wealth and we do nothing with it, has the master lost anything? Yes. Yes, ma'am. That's an accurate way to look at it. So, yes, at our men's Bible study last night, the topic was how do we move out of just going through the motions? How do we move into doing things with our whole heart? So this man, you can make the argument that the master doesn't lose anything, but the truth is the master has lost a lot, and the man has lost even more. And you'll notice that in the way that the master responds to him. Yes. Yes. Particularly realizing that he hadn't done anything with what's been entrusted to him. All right, if God is the master, and more specifically Jesus, is God a hard man? Is God a hard master? Is Jesus difficult? Okay. Why does this man think he's hard? He's using that as an excuse. I didn't want to do anything with what you gave me because you're mean. Okay, he doesn't really know the master. He doesn't know the master's heart. He's been given the master's stuff, but he doesn't really know what he probably does know what's expected. He just doesn't do it. So that makes more sense out of the way the master replies, verse 26, because this is harsh. The master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant." Wicked. Now that implies malice and evil, doesn't it? Wicked. But he didn't do anything. How is that wicked? We sometimes, let me just back up and say it this way. There are categories of sin. We ought to be very familiar with sin because we're good at it. There is unintentional sin. That's things we don't realize we've done, but we've done them. And we leave a wake of trouble and brokenness behind us everywhere we go. There is intentional sin, deliberate sin, where we know where the line is and we step right across it with rebellion and pride in our heart. But there are also something we call sins of omission. What is that? Yes. Perhaps there's someone in need, but we just turn our view and we don't respond with compassion, and we don't investigate, and we don't do anything with the resources we've been entrusted with. So there are sins of omission as well. You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Notice that he doesn't repeat the part about being mean, that you're a hard man, because that part's not true. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So, take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. That doesn't seem fair, does it? But is it reality? If you need something done, who's more likely to help you? Someone who's busy or someone who has nothing to do? This is a trick question, so ponder it. You would think it would be the person who doesn't have anything to do would be more than happy to have something to do. But most of the time, people that don't have anything to do, it's deliberate. They like not having anything to do, and they're usually unwilling to do more or anything. But someone who is busy is in the habit of doing, and so one more thing is one more thing, but they'll take it on, right? So the one who has 10 is given another bag of gold to invest and to work with. There's another way of looking at this that is a little bit scary for us too. Let me rephrase it this way. Are we a good investment for God? If he blesses us, will we take his blessings and use them and multiply them? Or will we bury them? Are we a good investment for the things that God would bestow upon us? Yes. It is. So there's a lot for us to do with the gifts that God's given us, and people to reach and ways to use those things. If we have an ability or a resource or time and we don't use it, what happens to it? It gets wasted, or in fact, it goes away. Don't use your arm and the muscles will eventually atrophy to the point that you can't use your arm anymore. And so it is with so many other abilities and opportunities and talents that God blesses us with. And this parable is comprehensive. It's not just talking about money. It's not just talking about time. It's not just talking about witnessing opportunities. It's not just talking about abilities that God's blessed us with. It's talking about all of it, the whole package. Now, the context of this parable, there was a parable about 10 women, 5 wise, 5 foolish. What's the context? Where does this parable fit into the block of teaching? What's the main subject? Jesus' return, the Master's return. Will we be held accountable for what we've done with what we've been entrusted with? And who is speaking these words? It's none other than Jesus, our Lord, who gave his life for us on Calvary's cross, the one who loves us more than we can imagine. So these words are words of encouragement as well as warning, to move us away from doing nothing to finding the things that the Lord would have us do with what he's blessed us with. So the judgment here is a little bit harsh. I didn't finish reading verse 29. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the master has called him wicked, lazy, and now worthless. Worthless. Not fulfilling his purpose, not fulfilling the mission that's been entrusted to him, not contributing positively. It's a harsh, harsh parable. And then we get to the next parable. And it helps us to see some of the things we ought to be doing with these resources that we've been blessed with. They are interconnected. And I'll confess to you that even though we're studying the parables of Jesus, this next one is not much of a parable. It's more of a proclamation of future events. There's a little bit of parable in there. There's a part about sheep and goats. But mostly it's a description of what is going to happen. So it's less parable and more history, future history, of course, events that will take place. So Jesus begins, verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. Now, I've mentioned to you before that Son of Man is Jesus' favorite title for himself. And it comes directly out of Daniel chapter 7, verse 14, where the Son of Man descends on the clouds, and he is given the worship and authority and power over all the earth. All peoples will worship him. And so this is Jesus' favorite expression. And notice, if you will, in just a minute, he'll be referred to as the King. The Son of Man is the King. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. And Jesus here is talking about himself. Does he know who he is? Why, yes. So when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he'll have all his angels with him, and he'll sit on a glorious throne, a place of authority. Now, all the angels, how many is that? More than 2. Myriads of angels, which is fancy Greek talk for more than can be counted. Lots and lots. And notice here that it's all the angels. So nobody stays home. No reruns of Gunsmoke to watch that day. All the angels are there. But that's not all who are there. The angels are all there. And look at verse 32. All the nations will be gathered before him. Well, if you aren't careful, you could read, okay, there'll be some people from Spain, and some people from France, and people from India. All the different nations will be represented. No, that's not what it says. In fact, if you look at the language it's written in, it's really saying all peoples. From wherever they may be from, all peoples will be there. All peoples who have ever lived will be there. So this is the largest meeting ever, because everyone who's ever lived and all of the heavenly host will be present. But at the center is the Son of Man, the King, who is sitting on his throne. And here's the parable part. He will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Now, I know we have some folks in here that can help me if I'm getting this wrong, but at least in Middle Eastern life, from the reading I've done, sheep don't mind being out in the open air at night. Goats need warmth. So you separate the sheep and the goats because they have different needs. And so this would be a normal practice for a shepherd at the end of the day to then separate the flock. They can graze together and do things together during the day, but at night they are separated because their needs are different. And so here you have the King separating all the people who have ever lived, and some are on his right and some are on his left. The King will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." Who has blessed them? God has blessed them. Over and over and over, they are blessed, and he offers them an inheritance. Do you have to work for an inheritance? No, it's a gift, right? So it is a gift that has been received. Blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, a kingdom that's been prepared. How long? Since even before the world was made. So God has been preparing a kingdom for his children. And that's a beautiful, powerful thought. Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. What would be required to do some of these things? Did you say love? Yes. Would you have to have a lot of resources? Not necessarily. I mean, there might be a situation that might require some help, but for the most part, it's the gift of presence and sharing and love, right? I guess you have to have food to share with someone who's hungry, but you know, the Lord provides those things. So notice, if you will, that this list is not a supernatural, only the most holy folks can participate. He doesn't say, I was sick and you healed me, for example. He says, I was sick and you took care of me. Yeah. He doesn't say, I was in prison and you set me free. He says, I was in prison and you visited me. So these are daily, ordinary tasks that pretty much anybody can do. Would y'all agree? But Brenda, I think, hit the nail on the head. What's required? Love. Yeah. So, ma'am? Okay. So, notice too, who is it that's hungry? It's Jesus. Jesus who is hungry, Jesus who is thirsty, Jesus who is in prison, Jesus who needs clothes. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? Well, these people evidently don't have very good memories. They just can't remember these things. Why do you think that is? They are ordinary things. If you have been sharing your food on a daily basis all your life, are you going to remember every instance? If you've been visiting sick people every week, are you going to be able to remember every time you visited a sick person? Well, no. These are lifestyle things, and we're just doing them, and we're not keeping records. We're not, that's not the reason we're doing it. It's just part of what we do. And so it all kind of gets blurred together, doesn't it? Now, part of their point in asking the question is, you, Lord, we didn't remember helping you with these things. And so that's part of the confusion they're having here. I don't remember seeing you, the King of the universe, hungry. And then look at Jesus' reply. The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Who does Jesus identify with? Those who are in need, the poor, the lonely, those who need that love. And so Jesus says, when you've done it unto the least of these, you have done it unto me. Our society is plagued by competing worldviews. And I hate to tell you this, but the biblical worldview seems to be losing momentum, losing ground in the marketplace of ideas. And what has taken its place is something called survival of the fittest. But what does the Bible teach? Does it teach survival of the fittest? Or does it say we'll be judged by how we treat the weakest members of society? Jesus said, when you've done it unto the least, those who are in the greatest need, you have done it unto me. And there's a beautiful picture here because Jesus is in the person who is helping. And Jesus is in the person who is receiving help. So Jesus is glorified through the whole process. He plays all the parts. And that's a beautiful, miraculous thing too. Is it possible to get frustrated trying to help people? It really is. Because sometimes even the ways we think we're helping, we're really hurting, and so it all gets very confusing. But it's a great help to us to realize that we can see Jesus in that other person, and that that person is someone who has been created in God's image. It's a person for whom Jesus died, and it's a person whom Jesus identifies with. And so he says, when you've done it unto the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. Everyday things done regularly. They really don't even have a memory of it. It's just part of who they are and part of the way they live. And that should describe those who belong to Jesus. When we have received his forgiveness, we should be people who forgive. When we've received his blessings, we should be people who are a blessing to others, right? So take this message and put it back with the other parables that we've looked at, and you begin to get a glimpse of the whole picture as Jesus is laying it out. And it would be beautiful if that's the end of the parable. But it's not. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. What's Jesus talking about? What is the eternal fire? We might call it hell. Who was it prepared for? Yes. And so this verse reveals a powerful truth. Hell was not created for us. It was created for the devil and his angels. But if we choose to go there, God honors our choice. And so Jesus says, "Depart from me. I was hungry, you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." Now, ignoring the needs is a bad thing, but what typically happens in society? Is it just that we don't feed the hungry, or that we take food away from the hungry and we take things that are needed away from the least of these? So there's quite an indictment here. They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger and needing clothes or sick and in prison and did not help you?" And he will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. It's a powerful parable, and it's the last one that's recorded for us in the book of Matthew. And this parable about the sheep and the goats only appears here. The other gospel writers do not include it. Does it teach that we can get to heaven by helping people? You got to love them, yes. And that love comes from God. It comes out of our relationship with God. And so you can twist this to make it into a works righteousness and make Christianity like all the other made-up religions in the world, where you have to, feed a certain number of hungry people and that kind of thing before you can advance on to the next step and stage. And we're good at quantifying and making those things that way. But remember how it started. "You who are blessed by my Father, inheritance, a kingdom prepared for you." These acts of love, these acts of service flow out of our relationship with God. Jesus says a good tree will produce good fruit. And so this is the fruit that is produced. And so I don't think this parable is teaching us that if we don't visit enough sick people, hell is waiting. I do think it's telling us in very direct and plain terms that we're responsible for the gifts God's given us, and He's placed people in our lives that need our love and that need our care, and that Jesus is represented among them. And that really should change our perspective on, pretty much everything. So it's a powerful, powerful parable. Wait a minute. Is it a parable? No, it's really not. There's that part about sheep and goats. But it's really a story about what's going to happen. One day we'll all be together and be given the opportunity to give account for what we've done with what God has blessed us with, what He's entrusted to us. So, if these parables or stories or future events are in the context of Jesus' return, how do we get ready for Jesus' return? Yes. Use the resources He's blessed us with to be a blessing. Meet needs. Share the love that God has given us. So preparing for Jesus' return is not really about setting dates or stocking up food supplies or making charts or all the things that people like to do when they talk about end times. What's it really about? It's about loving people and blessing them with the things God has blessed us with. Yes. It's kind of like the fellow who has the 5 bags and gets 10 and then gets another one. Love is that way, isn't it? Is there just a little bit of love, and if we give some of it away, we don't have enough? No, it multiplies, doesn't it? So powerful, powerful teaching that should give us a whole different perspective on how to anticipate Jesus' return and how to welcome his return with joy and gladness, where we can share in the Master's happiness. But unfortunately, we get bogged down and put our emphasis on all the wrong things. And so there are many people who have read this and say, well, that may be that important. Let's set some dates. Let's, make this plan or make this chart or that kind of thing. And they miss the love that we're supposed to be sharing with each other. Father, thank you for your word. It is true and real. It describes the world that we live in, and it describes the world that you are preparing us for. Help us to love people as you love them, and to realize that part of our purpose and part of what you have entrusted for us to do is to minister and to serve in your name. Help us to make the most of everything you've entrusted to us, that we might share in your joy